Standing in the back of St. Matthew's Cathedral in my ill-fitting rental tuxedo, watching my sister Victoria walk down the aisle in her $1,000 dress, I never imagined that in less than 2 hours, a single whispered question from Father Rodriguez would change everything I thought I knew about my family, my past, and myself. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from, and if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. The morning of Victoria's wedding started like every other day in the Mitchell household, with me being invisible. I was folding programs in the church basement while my mother Patricia fussed over flower arrangements upstairs, completely forgetting I existed until she needed someone to carry something heavy or fix something broken. "Marcus, where are those programs? The guests will be arriving soon." Victoria's voice echoed down the stairs, sharp with the kind of stress that comes from trying to orchestrate the perfect day. I'd been up since 5 a.m., picking up last-minute items from 3 different vendors across Chicago because Victoria's wedding planner had somehow forgotten to confirm half the deliveries. The boutonnieres from Michigan Avenue, the specialty candles from a shop in Lincoln Park, and the custom napkins that absolutely had to match the exact shade of champagne that Victoria had spent weeks selecting. My sister had always been the golden child. At 28, she was a successful marketing executive at a prestigious firm downtown, engaged to Bradley Pemberton, whose family owned a chain of luxury hotels across the Midwest. Everything Victoria touched seemed to turn to gold, while I was the guy who delivered her wedding supplies and tried to stay out of the way. "These programs are crooked," Victoria said, snatching the stack of programs from my hands when I finally made it upstairs. "Didn't I tell you to make sure they were perfectly aligned?" I spent 45 minutes making sure each program was precisely folded, but pointing that out would only make things worse. "Sorry, Vic, I'll fix them." "Don't call me Vic today. It's Victoria. This is my wedding day, not some backyard barbecue." She thrust the programs back at me. "And try to look presentable when you fix them. Bradley's family will be here soon, and I don't need them thinking we're, you know." I knew exactly what she meant. The Pembertons came from old money, the kind of family that had been wealthy for so many generations they'd forgotten what it felt like to worry about anything. Our family, on the other hand, lived in a modest 2-bedroom house in Cicero. My mother worked double shifts at the hospital, and I'd been bouncing between part-time jobs since graduating community college 2 years ago. "Where's your father, Marcus?" Father Rodriguez appeared beside me, his kind eyes scanning the bustling church. He'd been the parish priest for over 20 years and had watched both Victoria and me grow up. "He's not coming, Father," I said quietly, focusing on the programs to avoid his sympathetic gaze. "Still no word from him?" I shook my head. Our father, Robert Mitchell, left when I was 12 and Victoria was 16. One Tuesday morning, he was drinking coffee at our kitchen table, and by Wednesday evening, his closet was empty. No note, no explanation, no forwarding address, just gone. Victoria had convinced herself, and everyone else, that he'd left because of me, because I wasn't the son he'd wanted, because I wasn't smart enough, ambitious enough, successful enough. She never said it directly, but the implication was always there in the air between us, like incense. "Your mother mentioned you've been helping out quite a bit with the wedding preparations," Father Rodriguez said, straightening his vestments. "Just doing what needs to be done." "That's admirable, son. Family is everything, even when it doesn't feel like it's appreciated." Before I could respond, Patricia rushed over, her face flush with pre-wedding anxiety. "Marcus, the photographer needs someone to help move those chairs from the back room, and after that, can you check if the florist left the extra boutonnieres in the car? Bradley's cousin flew in from Seattle at the last minute." I nodded and headed toward the back room, passing groups of elegantly dressed guests who were beginning to arrive. The contrast between them and me was impossible to ignore. Designer suits, expensive jewelry, the kind of casual confidence that comes from never having to worry about whether you belong somewhere. The Pemberton family had taken over the first 3 rows on the groom's side. Bradley's father, Charles Pemberton, was a tall man with silver hair and the kind of commanding presence that made people automatically step aside when he walked through a room. His wife, Eleanor, were pearls that probably cost more than my mother made in 6 months. "You must be Marcus," Eleanor said when I passed by, carrying a stack of chairs. "Victoria's mentioned you." I was sure she had, though probably not in the way that would make Mrs. Pemberton eager to continue the conversation. Yes, ma'am. Just helping set up. How wonderful! It's so important to have family support on a day like this. Her smile was polite but distant, the kind reserved for service staff and distant relatives. By the time I finished moving chairs and tracking down the extra boutonnieres, guests were filing into the pews. I found my assigned seat in the fourth row, far enough back to be out of the way, but close enough that no one could say the bride's family wasn't properly represented. Victoria looked stunning when she appeared at the back of the church. The dress, the hair, the makeup, everything was perfect. She'd dreamed of this day since we were kids, cutting pictures out of bridal magazines and planning elaborate ceremonies for her dolls. But as she walked down the aisle on my Uncle Thomas's arm, he'd stepped in to give her away since our father wasn't there, I caught something in her expression that surprised me. For just a moment, behind all the joy and excitement, there was something that looked almost like sadness. The ceremony began with Father Rodriguez's warm welcome to the gathered families and friends. Bradley stood at the altar looking every inch the successful businessman he was. His groomsmen lined up beside him like a collection of magazine models. I tried to focus on the readings, the music, the careful choreography of the wedding mass, but my mind kept wandering to all the small moments that had led to this day, all the times Victoria had made it clear that I was an afterthought in the family narrative. All the occasions when my achievements, modest as they were, had been overshadowed by her latest promotion or accomplishment. When Father Rodriguez asked if anyone knew of any reason why Victoria and Bradley should not be wed, the silence stretched longer than usual. I wondered if anyone else noticed, or if it was just my imagination. Bradley James Pemberton, Father Rodriguez continued, do you take Victoria Rose Mitchell to be your lawfully wedded wife? I do. Victoria Rose Mitchell, do you take Bradley James Pemberton to be your lawfully wedded husband? I do. The exchange of rings went smoothly. Victoria's hand steadied despite everything. I found myself thinking about the last time we'd really talked, not about wedding logistics or family obligations, but actually talked. It had been months, maybe longer. As Father Rodriguez began the final blessing, I noticed something strange. He kept glancing in my direction, his expression puzzled, as if he was trying to work something out. It wasn't the kind of look you'd give someone you'd known for years. It was the look of recognition. But recognition of what? The ceremony was winding down, guests shifting in their seats in anticipation of the recessional, when Father Rodriguez's voice suddenly caught. He recovered quickly, but I saw him look at me again, this time with something that might have been shock. Victoria and Bradley were pronounced husband and wife to enthusiastic applause. They kissed, turned to face their guests, and began their walk back down the aisle. This was supposed to be the moment of pure joy, the culmination of months of planning and thousands of dollars spent. But as they passed my row, Victoria's eyes found mine. For a split second, her triumphant smile faltered, not because of anything I'd done, but because of something she saw in my face. Something that made her realize that this day, her perfect day, was about to become something entirely different. The organ music swelled, rice and rose petals filled the air, and the newlyweds made their way toward the church doors. I stood with everyone else, clapping politely, when Father Rodriguez stepped away from the altar and moved quickly down the side aisle. He was heading straight for me. The crowd was flowing toward the exit, eager to congratulate the happy couple and move on to the reception at the Palmer House downtown. But Father Rodriguez was pushing against the tide, his eyes locked on mine with an intensity that made my stomach drop. When he reached me, he leaned in close enough that no one else could hear what he was about to say. His voice was barely above a whisper, but every word hit me like a physical blow. "Excuse me, son," he said, his hand gripping my arm. "I need to ask you something very important." The last of the guests were filing out, the church growing quiet except for the distant sound of celebration from the parking lot. Victoria's laughter carried through the open doors, bright and carefree, completely unaware that her brother was about to learn something that would change both of their lives forever.
Father Rodriguez's grip on my arm tightened as the last echoes of organ music faded from the cathedral. His weathered face, usually calm and reassuring during Sunday sermons, now carried an expression I'd never seen before, a mixture of disbelief and something that looked almost like fear.
A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. Marcus, I need you to look at me very carefully, he said, his voice barely audible above the distant sounds of wedding guests chattering in the parking lot. How long have you lived here in Chicago? The question caught me off guard. My whole life, Father, you know that. You baptized me when I was 3 months old. And your parents, Patricia and Robert Mitchell, they've been parishioners here for how long? Since before Victoria was born. Father, what's this about? Shouldn't you be at the reception? Victoria will notice if you're not there for the blessing. Father Rodriguez released my arm but didn't step back. Instead, he studied my face with the intensity of someone trying to solve a puzzle that had been bothering him for years. Marcus, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Have you ever heard the name Colonel James Harrison? The name meant nothing to me. No, Father, should I have? What about Harrison Industries, military contracts, government work? I shook my head, growing more confused by the second. Father, I really don't understand what this is about. Is everything okay? But Father Rodriguez wasn't listening anymore. He was staring at me like he'd seen a ghost, his face pale beneath his ceremonial robes. Sweet Mary and Joseph, it can't be possible. What can't be possible? Before he could answer, Victoria's voice cut through the empty church like a blade. Marcus, what are you doing? The photographer needs family photos before we head to the reception. She was standing in the doorway, still radiant in her wedding dress, but with an edge of impatience that I recognized all too well. Behind her, Bradley and several wedding party members were waiting, probably wondering why the bride's brother was having an intense conversation with the priest instead of celebrating. Coming, Victoria, I called back, but Father Rodriguez caught my arm again. Meet me in the rectory tonight at 9 o'clock. There's something you need to know. Something about your family that your mother should have told you years ago. Father Rodriguez! Victoria's voice was closer now, her heels clicking against the marble floor as she approached. The priest straightened, his expression shifting back to his usual serene mask with practiced ease. Of course, my dear, just discussing some parish business with your brother. Congratulations again. It was a beautiful ceremony. Thank you. Victoria's smile was genuine when she looked at Father Rodriguez, but when her eyes shifted to me, the warmth disappeared. Marcus, seriously, we need those photos now. The reception starts in an hour, and we still need to get downtown. The next few hours passed in a blur of forced smiles and awkward small talk. The photographer positioned me at the edge of every family photo, as if I might contaminate the perfect images if I got too close to the center. During the formal shots, Victoria's new mother-in-law, Eleanor, kept referring to me as Victoria's cousin until my mother finally corrected her. At the Palmer house, I found myself seated at table 12, not quite in the back corner, but far enough from the head table that I needed binoculars to see Victoria and Bradley during the toasts. My table mates were a collection of distant relatives and family friends who made polite conversation about the weather and the beautiful ceremony, while clearly wondering why they'd been relegated to the social equivalent of Siberia. Lovely wedding, said Mrs. Henderson, a neighbor from 3 houses down who'd known our family since Victoria and I were children. Your sister certainly has done well for herself. She has, I agreed, watching Victoria laugh at something Bradley's best man had said during his speech. And what about you, dear? Any special someone in your life? Before I could answer, my cousin Jennifer leaned over from the next seat. Marcus is still figuring things out, aren't you? Taking your time with everything. College, career, relationships. The implication hung in the air like smoke. At 24, I was apparently behind schedule on all the major life milestones that the Mitchell family considered important. Victoria had graduated summa cum laude from Northwestern, landed her dream job before graduation, and was now marrying into Chicago society.
I had an associate's degree in business administration and a part-time job managing inventory at a sporting goods store. There's no rush, Mrs. Henderson said kindly, but I could hear the pity in her voice.
The dinner conversation continued around me, but my mind kept drifting back to Father Rodriguez's strange questions. Colonel James Harrison, Harrison Industries. Why had those names made him look at me like he'd seen something impossible? During the dancing portion of the evening, I managed to avoid most of the social obligations by helping the catering staff clear tables and reset the room for the late-night celebration. It was easier than trying to make conversation with people who knew me only as Victoria's little brother and had already run out of polite things to say. "Marcus, what are you doing?" Patricia appeared beside me as I was stacking dessert plates. "This is your sister's wedding, not a restaurant. Go enjoy yourself." "I am enjoying myself, Mom. I like helping." "That's the problem," she said, but her tone was more sad than angry. "You're always helping, always in the background. When are you going to step forward and make something of yourself?" It was a conversation we'd had countless times before, usually ending with Patricia comparing me unfavorably to Victoria or lamenting that I hadn't inherited my sister's drive and ambition. Tonight, though, something in her voice was different. There was a weight to her words that I hadn't heard before. "I'm doing fine, Mom." "Fine isn't enough, Marcus. Your sister understood that. She pushed herself, set goals, made connections. She didn't just accept being ordinary." The word hit harder than usual. Ordinary. As if being ordinary was some kind of moral failing, something to be ashamed of. "I know you think I'm a disappointment," I said, setting down the plates more forcefully than I'd intended. Patricia's expression softened slightly. "You're not a disappointment, honey. You're just lost, like you're waiting for someone to tell you who you're supposed to be." "Maybe I am." "Well, no one's going to do that for you. You have to decide for yourself what kind of man you want to become." She squeezed my shoulder and walked away, leaving me alone with the dirty dishes and the growing certainty that everyone in my life saw me as some kind of unfinished project. The reception wound down around 11 o'clock. Victoria and Bradley made their grand exit through a tunnel of sparklers, heading off to their honeymoon suite at the Drake Hotel before flying to Italy in the morning. The last of the guests filtered out, leaving behind empty champagne flutes, crumpled napkins, and the faint smell of expensive perfume. I helped my mother gather the leftover flowers and wedding favors, loading them into her car while she chatted with the last few stragglers about what a perfect day it had been. Victoria had gotten everything she'd wanted: the dress, the venue, the husband, the fairy tale ending. "Are you heading home?" Patricia asked, fishing her car keys from her purse. "In a little while. I want to make sure everything is cleaned up properly." "Always so responsible," she said, but there was that sad note in her voice again. "Don't stay too late, honey." I watched her drive away, then checked my watch. 8:30. Father Rodriguez had asked me to meet him at 9, and despite everything that had happened today, I was curious enough about his strange questions to show up. The rectory was a small building adjacent to the church, where Father Rodriguez lived and kept his office. A light was on in the front window when I knocked on the door at exactly 9 o'clock. "Marcus, thank you for coming." He opened the door quickly as if he'd been waiting right beside it. "Please, come in. We need to talk." His office was exactly what you'd expect from a parish priest. Shelves lined with theological books, a simple wooden desk, religious artwork on the walls. But tonight, there was something spread across his desk that didn't belong. Old newspaper clippings, what looked like military records, and a black and white photograph that he quickly turned face down when I entered. "Sit down, please," he said, gesturing to a worn leather chair across from his desk. "What I'm about to tell you is going to be difficult to hear, and I want you to know that I've wrestled with whether to share this information for months." Months? I first noticed the resemblance last Christmas during midnight mass, but I convinced myself I was imagining things. Then during Easter service, and again during your mother's birthday celebration in May. Tonight, seeing you in that tuxedo with your hair styled differently,
He trailed off, reaching for the photograph he had turned face down. "Father, you're scaring me." "I'm sorry, son. That's not my intention." He flipped the photograph over and slid it across the desk towards me. "Tell me what you see." The photograph was old, probably from the 1990s based on the quality and color saturation. It showed a man in military dress uniform, tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair and strong features. He was standing in front of what looked like the Pentagon, shaking hands with someone whose face had been cut off by the edge of the frame.
But it was his face that made my blood run cold. The jawline, the eyes, the nose. It was like looking into a mirror that had been aged 25 years. Who is this? Colonel James Harrison. He was a decorated military officer who disappeared in 1998 during a classified mission overseas. He was presumed dead, though his body was never recovered. Father Rodriguez's voice was steady, but his hands were shaking slightly as he reached for one of the newspaper clippings. He left behind a wife and 2 children, and according to these records, one of those children would be about your age. I stared at the photograph, my mind reeling. That's impossible. My father is Robert Mitchell. This is just a coincidence. Is it? Father Rodriguez spread out the other documents on his desk. Colonel Harrison's son was named Michael Harrison, born in Chicago, February 15th, 2001. According to these records, he would be 24 years old today. My birthday, February 15th, 2001. This doesn't make sense, I said, but even as the words left my mouth, pieces were starting to fall into place. The way my father had always seemed uncomfortable when I asked about his past, the lack of extended family on his side, the way he'd never talked about his childhood or his parents. "There's more," Father Rodriguez said gently. Colonel Harrison's wife reported him missing in early 1998. But according to the Chicago City records, Robert Mitchell first appeared in the system in March of 1998, a month after Colonel Harrison disappeared. The room felt like it was spinning. I gripped the arms of the chair, trying to process what Father Rodriguez was telling me. "You think my father was this Colonel Harrison?" "I think your father was running from something, Marcus. Something important enough that he had to disappear completely, take a new identity, start over with a new family." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "And I think tonight, seeing you in that formal wear, I realized that you've grown up to look exactly like the man in this photograph. But why would he leave again? If he'd already started over, why abandon us too?" Father Rodriguez was quiet for a long moment, studying the documents spread across his desk. "That's what we need to find out. Because, according to these records, Colonel James Harrison had access to some very sensitive information, the kind of information that people might kill for." Outside, Chicago's summer night was alive with the usual sounds of traffic and distant music, people going about their normal Saturday evening routines. But inside the rectory, everything I'd believed about my life, my family, and myself was crumbling into dust. "What do you want me to do with this information?" "First, I want you to take this photograph home and ask your mother if she's ever seen this man before. Don't tell her where you got it. Just see how she reacts." I took the photograph with trembling hands. The face staring back at me was undeniably familiar, but not because I'd seen it before. It was familiar because I saw elements of it every morning in the bathroom mirror. And then? Then, we're going to find out what really happened to Colonel James Harrison, and why a decorated military officer felt he had no choice but to fake his own death. The photograph felt like it was burning a hole in my jacket pocket during the entire drive home. Every red light, every stop sign gave me another chance to pull it out and stare at the face that could have been my own in 25 years. By the time I pulled into our driveway on Maple Street, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely turn off the engine. Patricia was in the kitchen when I walked in, still wearing her mother of the bride dress, but with her shoes kicked off under the table.
She looked exhausted but happy, the kind of satisfied tiredness that comes from watching your child achieve something you've dreamed about for years. How was the rest of the reception? I saw you talking to Father Rodriguez for a while. It was fine. I sat down across from her, the photograph feeling impossibly heavy in my pocket. Mom, can I ask you something? Of course, honey. I pulled out the photograph and placed it face down on the table between us. I need you to look at this and tell me if you recognize this person. Patricia glanced up from the programs, probably expecting to see a photo from the wedding or something equally mundane. Marcus, what's all this mystery about? It's been a long day. Please, just look at it. She sighed and reached for the photograph, flipping it over with the casual indifference of someone who had no idea their world was about to change. But the moment her eyes focused on the image, her entire body went rigid.
The color drained from her face so quickly I thought she might faint. Her hands began to tremble, and she dropped the photograph like it had physically burned her. "Where did you get this?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "So you do recognize him. Marcus, where did you get this photograph?" The change in her demeanor was so dramatic, it was almost frightening. Gone was the tired but content mother from moments before. In her place sat a woman who looked terrified. Father Rodriguez showed it to me. "Mom, who is this man?" Patricia stood up so abruptly that her chair scraped against the kitchen floor. She began pacing back and forth behind the table, running her hands through her hair and muttering something I couldn't quite hear. "Mom, you're scaring me. Please, just tell me who he is." She stopped pacing and looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Grief mixed with guilt and something that might have been relief. His name was James Harrison, and he was the love of my life. The admission hung in the air between us like a bomb that hadn't quite exploded yet. Was he my father? Patricia closed her eyes and nodded slowly. Yes. But Dad, Robert Mitchell, was James Harrison. He changed his name, his entire identity when he came to Chicago. She sat back down, her shoulders sagging with the weight of secrets she'd been carrying for over 2 decades. "Marcus, your father wasn't who you thought he was. He wasn't who any of us thought he was." "I don't understand. Why would he change his name? What was he running from?" Patricia got up and walked to the kitchen window, staring out at the dark backyard where Victoria and I had played as children. James was a military intelligence officer. He worked on classified projects, things he could never talk about even with me. But in 1998, something went wrong, something big. What kind of something? He never told me the details. He said it was safer if I didn't know. But one night in February of that year, he came home different, scared. He said we had to leave Washington immediately, that our lives were in danger. Washington? That's where we lived when you were born. James was stationed at the Pentagon. We had a house in Arlington, a normal life. Or at least, I thought it was normal. Patricia turned back to face me, tears starting to form in her eyes. He told me that some information had been stolen from his department, highly classified information that could compromise national security. And somehow, people thought he was responsible. Was he? I don't know. I wanted to believe he wasn't, but Marcus, when someone you love asks you to disappear in the middle of the night with a newborn baby and never look back, you start to question everything you thought you knew about them. The kitchen suddenly felt too small, too warm. I loosened my tie and tried to process what my mother was telling me. "So you just left? Abandoned your entire life?" What choice did I have? James said that if we stayed, we'd all be dead within a week. He'd arranged new identities for all of us, Robert and Patricia Mitchell, with a son named Marcus instead of Michael. Victoria was born 2 years later, after we'd settled here in Chicago. Does Victoria know? No. As far as she's concerned, Robert Mitchell is her biological father, and you're her full brother. I never saw any reason to tell her differently.
But something in her voice suggested there was more to that decision than simple protection. Something that made me wonder if Patricia had always loved James Harrison more than Robert Mitchell, and Victoria, born into the new life instead of the old one, had somehow become more precious because of it. What happened to the original investigation, the stolen information? Patricia walked to the kitchen cabinet and pulled out a bottle of wine that had been left over from the wedding preparations. She poured herself a glass with shaking hands before answering. I don't know. James, Robert, he never talked about it after we came to Chicago. He found work as an accountant, completely different from his military career. We tried to build a normal life, but he was always looking over his shoulder, always waiting for something bad to happen. Is that why he left us?
I think so. In 2013, around the time you turned 12, he started getting paranoid again. He'd check the locks multiple times before bed, insist on taking different routes to work, avoid public places. Then one morning, I found a note on his pillow saying that staying with us was putting us in danger. What did the note say exactly? Patricia set down her wine glass and walked to the junk drawer by the refrigerator. After rummaging through old receipts and expired coupons, she pulled out a folded piece of paper that looked like it had been read 1,000 times. I kept it, she said, handing it to me. I probably shouldn't have, but I couldn't bring myself to throw it away. The handwriting was my father's, but the words were like something from a spy novel. Patricia, they found us. I don't know how, but someone knows who I really am. If I stay, they'll come for all of you. I'm leaving tonight to draw them away. Don't try to find me. Don't let the children try to find me. Live your lives as the Mitchells and forget James Harrison ever existed. I love you all more than you'll ever know. Jay. Who are they? I never found out. I was too scared to look, too scared to ask questions that might put you and Victoria at risk. Patricia took the note back and refolded it carefully. I convinced myself that as long as we stayed quiet and lived normal lives, we'd be safe. But now Father Rodriguez has figured it out. Father Rodriguez is a good man, but he doesn't understand what he stumbled into. If he starts asking questions, if he tries to contact the military or the government— She didn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. So what do we do? Patricia looked at me for a long moment, as if she was seeing me clearly for the first time in years. We have a choice, Marcus. We can pretend this conversation never happened, burn that photograph, and go back to being the Mitchell family. Or we can try to find out what really happened to your father and why he felt he had no choice but to disappear twice. What do you think we should do? Honestly, the safe thing would be to forget all of this. Your father left to protect us. Maybe we should honor that by staying protected. But even as she said it, I could see in her eyes that she didn't really want to let it go. For 11 years, she'd lived with questions that had no answers, wondering if the man she'd loved was a hero or a traitor, wondering if he was still alive somewhere, wondering if she'd made the right choice by keeping his secrets. There's something else, I said, pulling out my phone. Father Rodriguez mentioned Harrison Industries. Maybe we should see what we can find out about them. Marcus, no! If we start digging into this, there's no going back. But I was already typing the name into my browser. What I found made my stomach drop. Mom, you need to see this. The search results showed dozens of news articles from the late 1990s, headlines about government contracts, military technology, corruption investigations, and right at the top of the list was an article from the Washington Post dated March 15th, 1998. Missing Colonel linked to Harrison Industries scandal, $50 million in defense contracts under investigation. Oh, God, Patricia whispered, reading over my shoulder. James, what did you get involved in? I clicked on the article, but most of the content was behind a paywall. What I could see, though, was enough to understand that whatever my father had been involved in, it was bigger than just stolen information. We need to call Father Rodriguez. Marcus, we can't. If people died because of what James knew, if there are still people looking for him, then maybe it's time we found out the truth. Maybe it's time we stopped living in fear of something we don't even understand. Patricia stared at the photograph of Colonel James Harrison, then at me, then back at the photograph. You look so much like him, she said softly. Sometimes when you smile or when you're concentrating on something, it's like he's right here in the room with us. Is that why Victoria always seemed to be your favorite? Because she reminded you of the new life and I reminded you of everything you'd lost? The question came out before I could stop it, but once it was out there, I realized I needed to know the answer. Patricia's face crumpled. Oh, Marcus, is that what you think? Isn't it true?
No, honey, it's not true at all. But I can see how it might have seemed that way. She reached across the table and took my hand. Victoria reminded me of myself, ambitious, determined, sure of what she wanted. You reminded me of your father, and that scared me, because I loved him so much, and I lost him so completely, that I was terrified of loving you the same way and losing you too. So you kept me at arm's length? I thought I was protecting myself, but I was really just punishing you for being the child who inherited his father's face. We sat in silence for several minutes, both of us trying to absorb the weight of 24 years' worth of misunderstandings and missed connections. Finally, I picked up the photograph of Colonel James Harrison and studied it again. What do you think happened to him? I don't know. But Marcus, if we're going to find out, we need to be prepared for any answer, including the possibility that your father wasn't the man I thought I married. 3 days after Victoria's wedding, I found myself sitting in the Chicago Public Library's main branch, surrounded by stacks of newspaper archives and government documents that I'd printed from various online databases. Patricia had given me permission to dig deeper, but only under one condition. Victoria could never know about any of this until we understood exactly what we were dealing with. The Harrison Industries scandal was bigger than either of us had imagined. What had started as a simple background check on my father's real identity had uncovered a web of defense contracts, congressional investigations, and at least 3 suspicious deaths of people connected to the company. Finding anything interesting? I looked up to see Father Rodriguez approaching my table, carrying a manila folder thick with documents. Despite our agreement to meet at the library, I was surprised he'd actually shown up. After our conversation in the rectory, I half expected him to reconsider getting involved in something this potentially dangerous. More than I wanted to, I said, gesturing to the chaos of papers spread across the table. Did you know that Harrison Industries was being investigated by Congress for selling defective body armor to soldiers in Bosnia? I didn't, but that explains a lot. Father Rodriguez sat down across from me and opened his folder. I've been doing some research of my own. Through some contacts I have at the Archdiocese, I was able to access military chaplain records from the late 1990s. What did you find? Your father wasn't just any intelligence officer, Marcus. Colonel James Harrison was the lead investigator on the Harrison Industries case. He was building a criminal case against the company's executives when he disappeared. The implication hit me like a physical blow. So he wasn't the criminal. He was trying to stop the criminals. It appears that way. According to these records, he had evidence that Harrison Industries had been deliberately supplying substandard equipment to the military for over 5 years, equipment that resulted in the deaths of American soldiers overseas. I stared down at a newspaper clipping from 1997, showing a young soldier's funeral. The headline read, "Local Marine dies in training accident. Family questions equipment failure." How many soldiers died? The official count was 37, but your father's investigation suggested the real number was much higher,
possibly over 100 deaths that had been covered up or misclassified as accidents. And he had proof of this. Father Rodriguez nodded grimly. According to the chaplain records, Colonel Harrison had compiled over 2,000 pages of evidence, financial records, email communications, testimony from whistleblowers inside the company. He was scheduled to present his findings to a congressional committee in March of 1998. But he disappeared in February, exactly 1 week before his scheduled testimony. I leaned back in my chair, trying to process the magnitude of what Father Rodriguez was telling me. My father hadn't been a traitor. He'd been a whistleblower trying to expose a conspiracy that had gotten American soldiers killed. So when he told my mother that they had found him, he probably meant people connected to Harrison Industries, people who had billions of dollars in government contracts to lose if his investigation succeeded. But why disappear? Why not go to the FBI or the media or someone who could protect him? Father Rodriguez's expression darkened. Because, according to these records, there's evidence that the conspiracy went much higher than just one defense contractor. There were Pentagon officials, congressional staffers, even some FBI agents who may have been taking bribes to look the other way.
So he couldn't trust anyone in the government. It looks that way. And Marcus, there's something else you need to know. Father Rodriguez pulled out a photocopy of what looked like a death certificate. 2 weeks after your father disappeared, the lead prosecutor on the Harrison Industries case died in a car accident. A month later, the congressional committee chairman had a heart attack. 3 months after that, the chief financial officer of Harrison Industries committed suicide. That's a lot of convenient deaths. Too many to be coincidental. And here's the thing. After all these key people were dead or missing, the Harrison Industries investigation was quietly dropped. The company was fined $50 million and allowed to continue operating under a slightly different name. What name? Pemberton Defense Solutions. The name hit me like a lightning bolt. Pemberton? As in Bradley Pemberton? As in my sister's new husband? Father Rodriguez nodded slowly. Charles Pemberton, Bradley's father, took over Harrison Industries in 1999 and rebranded it. He's now one of the largest defense contractors in the Midwest. My mind raced through the implications. Victoria had married into the family that was responsible for my father's disappearance, the family that had potentially ordered the deaths of dozens of American soldiers, the family that might still be looking for Colonel James Harrison's evidence. Does Bradley know about his family's connection to Harrison Industries? I don't know. He would have been a teenager when all this happened. It's possible his father kept him in the dark. Or it's possible this whole wedding was planned. What if they somehow figured out who Victoria was? What if they'd been watching our family this whole time? Father Rodriguez frowned. That seems like a stretch, Marcus. How would they have connected Victoria Mitchell to James Harrison? Your father went to great lengths to hide your family's true identity. But even as he said it, I could see doubt creeping into his expression. Because once you started questioning coincidences in a story like this, everything became suspect. I need to talk to Victoria, I said, starting to gather up the documents. Absolutely not. Father Rodriguez's voice was sharp enough to draw looks from other library patrons. Marcus, think about what you're saying. If there's even a chance that the Pembertons know who you really are, then approaching Victoria could put her in serious danger. She's already in danger. She just married into a family that might have killed our father. We don't know that, and we can't know that without more information. Information that could get us all killed if we're not careful about how we gather it. I slumped back in my chair, frustrated by the impossibility of the situation. So what do you suggest we do? We proceed very carefully. We gather more evidence before we make any moves. And we consider the possibility that the best thing for everyone involved might be to let sleeping dogs lie. You mean give up? I mean recognize that your father disappeared to protect you and your family.
Maybe the best way to honor his sacrifice is to stay protected. But I couldn't accept that. Not anymore. For 24 years, I'd lived as Marcus Mitchell, the unremarkable younger brother who never quite measured up to anyone's expectations. But I wasn't Marcus Mitchell. I was Michael Harrison, son of a man who'd risked everything to expose the truth about corruption that got soldiers killed. "There's something else," I said, pulling out my phone. "I've been thinking about what happened at the wedding, about how Father Rodriguez recognized me." "What do you mean?" "If Father Rodriguez could see the resemblance between me and my father's photograph, what are the chances that other people could see it too? People who might have worked with Colonel James Harrison." Father Rodriguez went pale. "You think someone at the wedding recognized you?" "I think it's possible. There were a lot of people there I'd never met before. Military contractors, government officials, people who move in the same circles as the Pembertons." I scrolled through the photos on my phone until I found some pictures from the reception. "Look at this." I showed him a photo Patricia had taken during the dinner. In the background, partially obscured by other guests, was a man in his 60s, talking intensely on his phone while staring directly at our table. "Who is that?"
I don't know. But he wasn't part of the wedding party, and he wasn't sitting with any family members I recognized. He was at a table with other older men in expensive suits. Father Rodriguez studied the photo carefully. "He could be anyone, Marcus. A business associate of Charles Pemberton's, someone from the hotel industry, a family friend. Or he could be someone who knew Colonel James Harrison 25 years ago and just realized that his son is alive and living in Chicago." We sat in silence for several minutes, both of us staring at the photograph and trying to decide if we were looking at evidence of a conspiracy or just seeing patterns where none existed. Finally, Father Rodriguez spoke. "There's one way we might be able to find out more without putting anyone in immediate danger." "How?" "I have a contact at the Veterans Administration, someone who might be able to access Colonel Harrison's service records without triggering any official investigations. If we can find out more about who your father worked with, who his contacts were, we might be able to identify potential threats. And if we find evidence that the Pembertons are still connected to this, then we'll have to decide whether to go to the authorities or disappear ourselves." "What about Victoria?" Father Rodriguez closed his folder and looked at me with the kind of expression usually reserved for delivering terminal diagnoses. "If the Pembertons married Victoria to get closer to your family, then she's already in more danger than she realizes. But if we're wrong, if this is all just an incredible coincidence, then investigating further could create dangers that don't currently exist. So we're damned if we do and damned if we don't? Welcome to your father's world, Marcus. Sometimes there are no good choices, only necessary ones." As we left the library together, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Every person on the street seemed like a potential threat. Every car that drove past could be following us. For the first time in my life, I understood why my father had looked over his shoulder for 15 years. But I also understood something else. I wasn't going to spend the rest of my life running from the shadows. Colonel James Harrison's son deserved to know the truth, even if that truth destroyed everything he believed about his family. The question was whether Victoria would survive long enough for me to find it. 2 weeks after our library meeting, Father Rodriguez's contact at the Veterans Administration came through with information that changed everything. Colonel James Harrison hadn't just been investigating Harrison Industries, he'd been preparing to testify about a network of defense contractors that had been systematically frauding the military for over a decade. But the most shocking revelation came in a classified memo that his contact had risked his career to obtain. Colonel Harrison had successfully hidden a complete copy of his evidence before disappearing. The location was encoded in a series of numbers that he'd left with his military chaplain as part of his final confession. He knew he was going to have to run, so he made sure the evidence would survive even if he didn't. The coordinates led to a storage facility in Schaumburg, about 40 minutes northwest of Chicago, Unit 247, paid for 27 years in advance under the name Michael Harrison. My real name. He left it for me, I said, the weight of that realization settling over me like a heavy blanket. The question is, are you prepared for what we might find? Before I could answer, my phone rang. Victoria's name appeared on the screen, and for a moment, I considered not answering. How could I have a normal conversation with my sister when I just learned that her husband's family might be responsible for our father's disappearance? Hey, Vic. Marcus, thank God you answered. I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Her voice was tight with an emotion I couldn't identify. Fear, maybe, or anger? What's wrong? Bradley's been acting strange since we got back from our honeymoon, asking weird questions about our family, about Dad, about things that happened when we were kids. At first, I thought he was just trying to get to know me better. But Marcus? She paused, and I could hear her breathing heavily on the other end of the line. Last night, I caught him going through old photo albums in the basement. When I asked him what he was looking for, he said his father had asked him to find pictures of Dad for some kind of family genealogy project.
My blood ran cold. What did you tell him? I told him we don't have many pictures of Dad because he wasn't much for cameras. But Marcus, that's not why I'm calling. Her voice dropped to a whisper. This morning, I found a business card in Bradley's jacket pocket. It was for a private investigator in Washington, D.C., someone who specializes in finding missing persons. Victoria, where are you right now? I'm at work, but Bradley doesn't know I called you. Marcus, I'm scared. What if he's not who I think he is? What if this whole marriage... Listen to me very carefully, I said, gesturing for Father Rodriguez to come closer so he could hear both sides of the conversation. Do not go home alone tonight. Go somewhere public, somewhere with lots of people. Can you do that? You're scaring me. Good. You should be scared. Victoria, I can't explain everything right now, but Bradley's family is connected to something that happened to Dad years ago, something dangerous. What are you talking about? Meet me at Millennium Park in 2 hours, the Bean. Come alone and make sure no one follows you. Marcus, you're not making any sense. Just trust me, Vic. For once in your life, please just trust me. After I hung up, Father Rodriguez was already putting on his coat. We need to get that evidence before we meet with Victoria. If Charles Pemberton has figured out who your family really is, we're going to need proof of what his company did. The drive to Schaumburg felt like the longest 40 minutes of my life. Every car behind us could be following us. Every phone call could be the one that sealed our fate. But when we finally reached the storage facility, the elderly manager led us to Unit 247 without any questions or suspicious looks. Been paid up through 2025, he said, handing me the key. Whoever rented this sure planned ahead. The storage unit was small, maybe 8 feet by 10 feet, and mostly empty except for a single metal filing cabinet in the back corner. Taped to the top drawer was an envelope with Michael, written in my father's handwriting. Inside the envelope was a letter that I'll never forget. Michael, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone and you've discovered who you really are. I'm sorry for the lies, son. I'm sorry for disappearing from your life twice. But I hope you'll understand that everything I did was to keep you and your mother and sister safe. The evidence in this cabinet will prove that Charles Pemberton and his associates caused the deaths of 127 American soldiers between 1994 and 1998. They sold defective equipment to the military, knowing it would fail in combat situations because it was cheaper than manufacturing gear that actually worked. I was going to testify against them in March of 1998, but they found out about my investigation. 3 attempts were made on my life before I decided to disappear. I couldn't risk putting your family in danger. If you're reading this now, it probably means they found you anyway. Use this evidence wisely, son, but remember that there are people in very high places who will do anything to keep this information from becoming public. I've watched you from a distance over the years. I know you think you're ordinary, but you're not. You have the courage to do what's right even when it's dangerous. I've seen it in the small choices you make every day. I'm proud of the man you've become, Michael. Your mother raised you well. All my love, Dad. The filing cabinet contained exactly what my father had promised.
thousands of pages of evidence documenting the systematic fraud that had gotten American soldiers killed. Financial records, email communications, internal memos discussing the known defects in body armor and vehicle parts. It was enough evidence to bring down not just Charles Pemberton, but dozens of other people who had been involved in the cover-up. "This is incredible," Father Rodriguez said, flipping through folders full of documents. "With this evidence, we could—" He was cut off by the sound of my phone ringing. Victoria again. "Marcus, something's wrong. I'm at Millennium Park, like you said, but there are men here. Men in suits who keep looking at me. I think they followed me. Get out of there, now. Go to the nearest police station."
I can't. They're between me and the exit. Marcus, I'm really scared. Stay on the phone with me. I'm coming to get you. Father Rodriguez was already loading the evidence into boxes. We need to get this to the FBI first. If something happens to us, at least the truth will survive. No time. Victoria's in danger right now. We loaded everything into Father Rodriguez's car and raced back toward downtown Chicago. But we were already too late. When we reached Millennium Park, Victoria was gone. In her place was a note tucked under the windshield wiper of my car. "Mr. Harrison, we have your sister. If you want to see her again, bring the evidence from Storage Unit 247 to the Pemberton Building, 47th floor, tonight at 8 p.m. Come alone. No police, no FBI, no one else, or she dies." Charles Pemberton had known who we were all along. The wedding, the romance, everything had been planned to get close to our family and find out what had happened to Colonel James Harrison's evidence. "We have to call the police," Father Rodriguez said. "They said no police. Marcus, you can't seriously be considering walking into an obvious trap. I can't let them hurt Victoria. She's innocent in all this. And getting yourself killed won't save her." But I was already formulating a plan. What if we give them some of the evidence, but not all of it? What if we keep copies and use them as insurance? It took us 3 hours to scan and copy every document in my father's files. Father Rodriguez drove to the FBI field office and left a complete set of evidence with instructions to open it if anything happened to us. I kept the originals to trade for Victoria's life. At 7:45 p.m., I walked into the Pemberton building carrying a briefcase full of the evidence that could destroy Charles Pemberton's empire. The elevator ride to the 47th floor felt like ascending to my own execution. Charles Pemberton was waiting for me in his office, along with 2 men who were obviously not corporate executives. Victoria was tied to a chair in the corner, looking terrified but unharmed. "Michael Harrison," Pemberton said, and it was strange to hear my real name spoken by someone who represented everything my father had fought against. "You look exactly like your father. I can see why Father Rodriguez recognized you. Let my sister go. I have what you want." "All of it?" "Everything my father left behind." Pemberton nodded to one of his men, who untied Victoria and pushed her toward me. She was crying, confused, probably wondering how her perfect life had turned into a nightmare. "The briefcase," Pemberton said. I handed it over, praying that Father Rodriguez had successfully delivered our insurance policy to the FBI. "You know," Pemberton said, opening the briefcase and glancing at the documents inside, "your father was a good man. Naive, but good. He really believed he could change things, expose the truth, make the world a better place. He did change things. This evidence will destroy you." Pemberton smiled. "Will it? Mr. Harrison, your father's evidence is 27 years old. Half the people mentioned in these documents are dead. The other half are in positions of power that make them untouchable. And Harrison Industries? That company was dissolved years ago. You can't prosecute a company that no longer exists. What about the soldiers who died? What about their families? What about them? Soldiers die, Mr. Harrison. It's what they do. The only question is whether their deaths serve a purpose or not." I realized then that Charles Pemberton wasn't just a criminal, he was a sociopath who genuinely believed that American soldiers were disposable assets in his business model. "The FBI has copies of everything," I said.
Yes, I'm sure they do. And in about 6 months, after a thorough investigation, they'll conclude that while these historical documents are interesting, there's insufficient evidence to pursue criminal charges against anyone currently alive. Pemberton closed the briefcase with a satisfied snap. You see, Mr. Harrison, I have friends in the FBI too. But he'd made one crucial mistake. While he was gloating about his connections and his immunity from prosecution, Victoria had been listening to every word, and Victoria, for all her faults, was nobody's fool.
"You killed American soldiers," she said, her voice steady despite her tears. "You killed soldiers, and you got rich doing it. I provided necessary equipment to the military at competitive prices. If some of that equipment occasionally failed, well, that's the nature of warfare. Bradley knows, doesn't he? He knows what kind of family he married into." Pemberton's expression darkened. "My son knows what he needs to know. But I know everything now, and you can't kill both of us without people asking questions." She was right, and Pemberton knew it. 2 people disappearing right after Victoria's wedding would draw too much attention, especially with Father Rodriguez and the FBI already involved. "No," Pemberton said finally, "I can't kill you, but I can make sure you never speak about this to anyone." That's when Father Rodriguez's backup plan went into effect. At exactly 8:30 p.m., FBI agents stormed the building, not because of the evidence we'd delivered. Pemberton had been right about his connections there, but because Father Rodriguez had called in a kidnapping report with the Chicago Police Department. The FBI might be willing to bury a 27-year-old defense contractor scandal, but they couldn't ignore an active kidnapping case involving the daughter of a prominent Chicago family. Charles Pemberton was arrested, though I knew he'd probably be out on bail within hours. But the damage was done. The story was public now, thanks to Victoria's testimony and the dramatic circumstances of our rescue. 6 months later, Bradley filed for divorce. He claimed he'd never known about his father's past, but Victoria didn't believe him. The FBI investigation into Harrison Industries was reopened, though, as Pemberton had predicted, most of the key players were either dead or protected by statute of limitations laws. But the families of the soldiers who had died finally learned the truth about what had happened to their loved ones. Congressional hearings were held. New regulations were passed to prevent similar fraud in the future. Charles Pemberton died of a heart attack 3 weeks before his trial was scheduled to begin. Some people said it was justice. Others said it was convenient. As for me, I finally understood what my father had been trying to tell me in his letter. I wasn't ordinary. I was the son of a man who had risked everything to do what was right, and I had inherited more than just his appearance. Victoria and I are closer now than we've ever been. She finally understands why I always seemed different, why I never quite fit into the Mitchell family narrative. And I finally understand that being underestimated isn't always a weakness. Sometimes it's the best disguise you can have. We still don't know what happened to our father, but we know that Colonel James Harrison's son is alive, and his story isn't over yet. Sometimes the most important battles are fought by people who seem like nothing special. Sometimes the heroes are the ones standing in the back of the room, invisible until the moment when someone whispers the right question. Is that the colonel?